Hi, welcome to our webinar called With Respect. So all about the new Respect at Work reforms that have come into play and have been mandated since December 2023. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting with you from today. That's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, as I'm in Sydney on Gadigal land. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Now, I want to introduce myself. I'm Emma Jones. I'm the founder and CEO of Project F. Project F is a social enterprise that helps organisations to take a systemic approach to closing the gender gap in technology teams and leadership. So we run an accreditation program and we set standards for gender diversity in technology. We work with lots of organisations, public and private sector, and we also work with all sizes of companies from small startups through to large enterprise. Now, this series is part of, if you haven't signed up for DEI Bites, it's a fortnightly newsletter. It's an email that's meant to be a tiny bite of diversity and inclusion that comes into your email box. Go onto the Project F website and sign up for it there. It's a pretty short, easy, digestible piece of news each fortnight about diversity and inclusion. Specifically, we try and keep it as specific as possible, relevant at the very least to the technology sector that we work very specifically in. So please do go to the website and sign up for the newsletter there if you'd like to, if you haven't already, and you'd like to have regular access to diversity and inclusion news. So DEI Bites is the live stream version of this. So we are running a DEI forum every month for most of this year now, with topics that are burning and need to be addressed for diversity and inclusion practitioners and for people in human resources, people and culture teams who are interested in diversity and inclusion or involved in diversity and inclusion work. We've got experts coming in at every live stream to talk to you about the latest updates in their space. And in this case, we're talking to Dr. Zoe Condliffe. So we're talking all about the Respect at Work legislation and the changes, the amendments to the bill that have been legislated and mandated for action by all workplaces from December 2023. So if you haven't actioned them yet, or if you've started your planning, but not completed it yet, these are the things that you're going to need to know. So a little bit about Zoe, Dr. Zoe Condliffe. She's a data activist. She's a gender advocate, researcher, and the founder and CEO of She's a Crowd, which is an award-winning story listening platform. And when I say award-winning, that includes the Telstra National Business Best of Business Award that they won in 2022. Very recently. Zoe has worked in social enterprises for many years across university, NGO and startup sectors, and she's become a highly respected thought leader in social change. She began pioneering work in 2016 in gender and youth advocacy for Plan International Australia with a digital crowd mapping tool for street harassment. And she went on to found She's a Crowd to leverage the power of storytelling to address the gender data gap. And She's a Crowd is a story listening platform. There's a product which I'll introduce, or Zoe will probably introduce to you later, that you can go in and check out as well for this, called Radial. And I'll put a QR code linking to that website so you can go take a look yourself a little bit later. So without further delay, I'm going to introduce you to Zoe. So welcome, Zoe.
Thanks so much, Emma, and thanks everyone for having me.
Great to see you here. Thanks for joining us. For context, Zoe and I have been working on a collaboration together for some time now between Project F and She's a Crowd. I'm a huge admirer of the work that Zoe does, and she came highly recommended to me some time ago, which is how I came to reach out to her in the first place. I'm a huge fan of the work that you're doing in this space. It's so needed. And we know that these issues are affecting all workplaces, and it's typically flies under the radar an awful lot of the time. So these reforms that have come into being fairly recently, so a year ago, and then mandated and legislated from December, are much needed, but we all need to be across them. We need to understand what this means in the workplace, so for employers, and what actions they need to take. So I'm going to hand over to you now. I'm going to remove myself and pop your presentation up. Please, for the audience, please do put your questions, any questions you might have, into the chat throughout, and I'll make sure that these are moderated and that all questions get answered before we close up at 1 o'clock. So I'll catch you in a bit.
Thanks, everyone. All right. So I'm calling from Dja Dja Wurrung country today as well, and I want to acknowledge that and acknowledge elders past, present and future as well. I work in beautiful Castlemaine in Victoria in the Goldfields. So yeah, I'm Dr. Zoe Condliffe, and I'm the founder and CEO of She's a Crowd. And today Emma asked me to speak about the new and very important Respect at Work legislation. There is a lot of information about this, as you will know if you've gone onto the website, lots to work through. And so I just really wanted to distill it for you today, to break it down, unpack it, ensure it's easy to understand, and really go over how it affects you and your business. And I'm going to also be speaking about it from the perspective of running a survivor-led, data-driven organisation such as She's a Crowd. So with our 6+ years experience of collecting gender data specific to sexual harassment, sexual violence, I really want to talk about that people-centric, trauma-informed lens that we bring, and how you might bring that to the work that you do moving forward in your organisation as well. There will also be time for Q&A at the end, as Emma spoke about. So let's get stuck in. So today we're really going to look at what this legislation actually signifies, what the shift is from previous legislation. We're going to do an overview of Respect at Work report findings and the implications for workplaces. We'll explore some of the key concepts that you do need to know about, such as positive duty, understanding sexual harassment, looking at the impacts of sexual harassment on that individual level, on the workplace level and on the economic level, navigating your responsibilities, an introduction to the 7 key domains of prevention and response, as well as the critical role of measuring and tracking sexual harassment in the workplace, and introducing Radial, our workplace story listening platform. And I guess the importance of measuring that prevalence and impact of sexual harassment over time, and then following with that interactive Q&A session as well. So to start with, let's delve into this imperative shift, which is really a shift from reactive to proactive approaches in addressing sexual harassment in the workplace, as mandated by Respect at Work. So this transformation necessitates a deep understanding of key concepts and a commitment to preventative measures. So before we go too much into that, I wanted to give an overview of the Respect at Work report 2020, which is really where this all came from. It's obviously available online. So if you have any further questions about it, you can always go and look at it as well. So in the terms of reference, the Human Rights Commission's task was to review and report on workplace sexual harassment and make recommendations in relation to its prevalence, nature, and reporting in Australian workplaces, the role of technology, its drivers, including risk factors for particular population groups or different workplace settings, the current legal framework around it, and existing measures that exist and good examples of good practice, its impacts as well on individuals and businesses, including economic impact. So that report came out in 2020. And overwhelmingly, through this, the Commission heard that the current system for addressing workplace sexual harassment in Australia is complex and confusing for victims, and employers to understand and navigate. It also found that it places a heavy burden on individuals or victims to make a complaint. And yet most people who experience sexual harassment never report it. So they fear that the impact of complaining it will have an impact on their reputation, their career prospects, their relationships, to industry and their community. So throughout the inquiry, the Commission heard that there was a need to really shift from this kind of reactive complaints-based approach to one which requires positive action from employers and a focus on prevention as well. So that is the major overarching thing you need to know, is this shift from the reactive, complaints-based, victim kind of having to take action to an approach which really kind of prioritizes prevention and positive action from employers. So to go further into this key concept of positive duty on employers, recommendation 17 in the report was to amend the Sex Discrimination Act to introduce a positive duty on all employers to take reasonable and proportionate measures to eliminate sex discrimination, sexual harassment, and certain forms of victimization as far as possible. So in determining whether a measure is reasonable and proportionate, the Act should prescribe factors that must be considered. So that might be the size of the person's business or operation. So the key word here is proportionate, right? So if you're a small corner convenience store, the actions that you're required to take are obviously going to look very different from if you're a large supermarket chain. So that word proportionate is very key there. Other things taken into account are the nature and circumstances of the business operations, the resources, the priorities, the practicability, and anything else that is relevant there that might be specific to the context of the business. So the Commission was also recommended in recommendation 18 to be given the function of assessing compliance within positive duty for enforcement. So this really means that what happens now is that the Commission can actually investigate and enforce positive duty. So they can undertake assessments of the extent to which an organisation has complied, and they can enter into agreements and enforceable undertakings, as well as apply to the court. And we'll go more into that in a minute. So I wanted to start really by understanding some other key concepts that are really relevant here to fostering safer and more inclusive workplaces. So we've gone into positive duty, and this is just a little bit of a timeline into the background here of how this came about. So in December 2022, this new positive duty on employers and persons conducting a business to eliminate workplace sex discrimination and harassment commenced. And then in December last year, that's when it actually became mandated. So those regulatory powers have already come into place. And that's why this affects every single business, employer, and organisation in Australia. So I spoke earlier about this shift towards prevention. So sexual harassment is a pervasive issue with profound consequences for individuals and organisations alike. From verbal forms of intimidating behaviours, its impact extends beyond immediate victims and actually affects things like workplace productivity and societal well-being as well. So as employers, we bear significant responsibility in combating sexual harassment and recognizing that power imbalances and gender inequality actually are what underpin such behaviours. And this is absolutely key. We must implement preventative measures to create cultures of respect and accountability in our workplaces. So that's why it's really important that we not only understand, what we need to do, but why it's so important and why prevention, there has been a shift towards prevention. So under the Sex Discrimination Act from 1984, sexual harassment is defined as any unwelcome sexual advance, unwelcome requests for sexual favours, or other unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature in relation to the person harassed. So up on the screen are some common examples of sexual harassment. You can see things like sexually explicit pictures, posters or gifs, attempted sexual assault, being followed or watched, sharing or threatening to share intimate images without consent, intrusive questions about a person's private life, sexual gestures, sexually explicit comments, and things like that. So there is a whole range of actions that this term really encapsulates. And the impacts here can be individual. So obviously, if you are the victim of sexual harassment, you might experience impacts on your health and well-being, your employment and career prospects, and you might also experience financial consequences. For the organisation, there are also significant impacts of sexual harassment. We see lost productivity occur, we see staff turnover and issues with workplace culture, resourcing issues, actually having to resource, these complaints, and other things, as well as potentially reputational damage as well. And Deloitte estimated that the cost to the economy, the Australian economy, in 2018 alone from sexual harassment in the workplace was $3.8 billion. So who is actually at risk of sexual harassment in the workplace? So research indicates that women experience higher rates of workplace sexual harassment than men. So 39% of women had experienced sexual harassment, but men as well, 26% of men had too. There are other groups as well of workers who might be more likely to experience sexual harassment in the workplace. These include young workers under 30, the LGBTQIA+ community, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workers, workers living with disability, workers from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and migrant workers, workers holding temporary visas, or people who are in working arrangements which might be considered precarious and insecure. So I now want to go into your responsibility for preventing sexual harassment in the workplace, now that we've understood what it really is and some of the impacts of it. As employers, we do bear a significant responsibility in combating sexual harassment, and as we've kind of covered today, this is now enshrined in legislation. So the first thing that Respect at Work really urges employers and organisations to understand is that employers need to understand that the power imbalances and gender inequality that exist within workplaces and in society are what underpin these behaviours. So there's a big emphasis on understanding really the key drivers behind these behaviours first and foremost, and understanding them is necessary in order to prevent them. So sexual harassment is a social problem. Stopping it is not just about altering the behaviour of the individuals. We need to change the culture and environment of workplaces in which it occurs. So to prevent sexual harassment from happening in the first place, we must recognise the systemic and contextual issues that drive these behaviours. Primary prevention is all about addressing the root cause or drivers of sexual harassment rather than waiting for it to happen and then reacting or responding. So power relates to the possession of control, authority, or influence over others. And obviously it's a complex concept with many dimensions, but the concept of power, and specifically the misuse of power, is central to understanding the causes of sexual harassment and how that plays out in a workplace setting as well. So considering this graphic here on the slide, you can see that gender inequality lies below the surface and is driving sexual harassment. So a person who sexually harasses someone else is primarily responsible for their behaviour. However, in many cases, organisations can also be held liable for sexual harassment by their workers, agents and contractors, unless they can show that they took steps to prevent it from occurring. So this is known as vicarious liability, and again is why understanding prevention and how you can actually work to prevent these from occurring in the first place is so key for employers, especially at this point in time. So the new model that's been put forward by Respect at Work is a two-tiered model, prevention and response. So we're not abandoning response at all. Obviously, sometimes these things do happen. We need to know how to respond appropriately, but we're putting just as much emphasis on prevention. So the Respect at Work initiative introduces this comprehensive prevention and response model, and it encompasses 7 key domains. So these include leadership, risk assessment and transparency, culture, knowledge, support, reporting, and measurement. So central to this model, and you'll see here that on the left we've got response and on the right we've got prevention. And central here to this model is measuring, because when we're able to measure and track, firstly, understanding the prevalence, the key pain points, where the issue's occurring, to who it's occurring to within our organisation, we're able to understand what we can actually do about it, and then we're able to track our progress over time as well and tailor interventions effectively. So you can see that measurement here ties back into the circle, where you then go back into improving how you do leadership, how you do risk assessment, transparency, etc. And the cycle goes around. So, and I'll just go back for a second. So really gathering workplace data actually helps us understand the scope of the problem, to benchmark progress and then tailor those interventions. So I want to quickly talk about I'll pull a couple of these aspects out. And of course there's 7 of them. So, you know, there's a lot in there, and there's a lot of resources on the Respect at Work website as well for what to do, how to take action, what they all mean, and things like that. But to pull out the first one, so leadership, it's really about how leaders at all levels in an organisation do play a critical role in creating safer and respectful workplaces. They're crucial in setting the organisation's framework for prevention and response to sexual harassment in the workplace, and they role model as well. So they can role model a diverse, inclusive, trusted and gender equal culture. Without serious commitment from leadership, Australian workplaces will struggle to embrace changes in mindset and approach needed to reduce the prevalence of sexual harassment in Australia and to make our workplaces safer. Senior leaders may also have duties as a person conducting a business or undertaking, or an officer under the WHS laws as well. And then, of course, the role of risk assessment and transparency, which you'll have seen is in the 7 key domains as well. So this process of risk assessment involves first identifying the risks regarding sexual harassment in your particular workplace context. So what that really means is, where is the risk and how does it occur? And that's what I was alluding to earlier in terms of measurement, really actually understanding what's going on in the workplace, to who, where is it, what's actually happening. The second piece here is assessing the risk. So how much harm can it actually cause, and how much harm does it cause on that individual level and on that workplace level as well. And then going into controlling risk. So really what can be done about this is the next step. And then lastly, reviewing risk and reviewing control measures. So are these measures working? And that's where, again, measurement is key, because you need to be able to track your progress. You need to be able to benchmark and see, you know, if things are improving over time. So always reviewing them before going back into that risk assessment model. And I've also highlighted transparency here as well, because I do think it's absolutely key that leaders are transparent throughout the process and are keeping everyone informed. And you'll see knowledge is one of the key pillars in the 7 key domains as well. Really ensuring that people know that these processes exist and that this is going on, being transparent about them. So again, the importance of measurement as a critical component here. We know that less than 20% of workers who experience sexual harassment report their experience. So measuring systems that narrowly focus on reported incidents of sexual harassment and the nature and prevalence of those reported incidents will be ineffective and insufficient. So this really goes back to the difference between reporting and measuring. Both have different functions and need to operate differently. So an effective measuring approach will collect and analyze quantitative and qualitative data to allow you, the organisation, to understand, identify, measure, and monitor. So you can see here this measuring cycle. So really, I'll go through that in a little more detail in a minute, but defining what to measure and how to measure it, analysing your data, communicating insights and results back to the team. And again, that's speaking to that transparency and that knowledge, the operationalization of data. So turning the data into valuable actions that can improve the prevention and response of your organisation to sexual harassment, and then refreshing the data frequently as well is very important, ensuring that it remains relevant. So what to measure? The prevalence of sexual harassment in your workplace. So that is the amount or frequency that occurs is what you need to measure. And importantly, this is not the same as formally reported cases. So you might have a complaints process within your company, but we know that around 20% of what actually goes on gets reported. And this might be for a huge host of reasons. People might not be comfortable identifying themselves. They might think that it's too difficult to report. They might have issues with trusting authorities. The issue might be normalized within the culture. They might have internalized the issue and thought that they were to blame. They might just think, you know what, it's not worth me reporting. I don't want to go through the process of it for whatever reason. So therefore, you might not be capturing what's actually going on in the workplace. So it's important here to not conflate or confuse the difference between reporting and complaints processes with measuring. And I'll go into how we can actually accurately measure these, the prevalence of this issue later as well. So we also need to measure the nature of sexual harassment in your workplace, like when, where, and how it occurs, what forms it takes, as well as systemic trends and patterns relating to culture and the drivers of sexual harassment in your organisation, including in relation to corporate culture. We need to measure the impact that sexual harassment has on your workers and your business, and then, you know, you can also extend that to society. And we need to measure the risks unique to your organisation and industry, and the nature and effectiveness of initiatives designed to prevent and respond to sexual harassment through each of the 7 domains. So then that speaks back to that continuous measurement and tracking progress. So this approach enables the communication of insights and results and the operationalization of those insights to improve processes and systems. So this can lead to data-informed decision-making, so making sure that decisions made in relation to this issue are actually based off of evidence. And the development and implementation of the most effective approach for your people and your organisation. It leads to the continuous improvement of sexual harassment prevention and response, accountability and transparency, not only in relation to the prevalence and nature of sexual harassment processes and progress against your sexual harassment prevention and response plan, and also opportunities for cross-industry collaboration and specific risks or trends and shared learnings that may benefit workplaces of a similar nature as well. So that really leads me into what I do. So I run She's a Crowd, and we have a product called Radial. So we're the world's leading story listening platform for sexual harassment. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we came about and where we started. So we started as a data-driven consulting agency, and we designed a safe and anonymous storytelling platform for sexual violence and a data insights dashboard for our customers. We soon became the biggest geospatial database for sexual violence in the world, with over 120,000 unique stories. So we knew that survivors felt safe to share their stories with us. We worked with organisations and governments who were really leading the charge. And along the way, we met clients like Jason. So he needed support to comply with these upcoming Respect at Work mandates and needed a safe and anonymous technical survey platform, gender expertise, and a clear action plan for a complex employee base of almost 200,000 people. And that's, of course, Woolworths Group, Australia's largest employer. So this quote from Jason: "At Woolworths Group, we're dedicated to fostering a workplace free from harassment and disrespect, where all team members feel safe and empowered to bring their whole selves to work." So we found that people like Jason had a limited range of solutions that really catered to these needs. Existing other solutions don't provide tangible, contextual, or relevant analytics or action plans for next steps. For Respect at Work, they're not necessarily safe enough for the collection of that really personal and sensitive information and data. They're not necessarily anonymous or survivor-centric in their approach. So not necessarily ensuring the psychological safety of people as they are recounting these really traumatic and sensitive events. And sometimes they're just too general and focus on perhaps just bullying or something else, not really applying that specific sexual harassment or gender lens. And they can also be expensive and time-consuming, of course, as well. So we knew that every workplace has to act now in order to comply with new Respect at Work mandates. And that's why we created Radial, the world's leading story listening solution for sexual harassment in the workplace. And we tested it and used it to support Australia's biggest employer to great success. So Radial is our end-to-end software solution, which empowers workplaces to measure, prevent, and respond to sexual harassment. We have a cloud-based reporting platform where you can access our best practice templates to create a people-first, trauma-informed, secure survey, which is then distributed to all of your employees via a link. We manage risk, data security, and technical support. So that means that we manage all data storage, risk, and technical assistance to ensure that employers can collect personal and sensitive employee data securely and truly anonymously. And we, of course, apply our gender expertise to our tailored data analysis. So we provide customers with access to our AI-based data insights, as well as having access to your own raw data extract of your workplace data, industry benchmarking, and tailored actionable recommendations for next steps. And of course, we've got this wonderful testimonial here from Woolworths, who say, you know, the insights provided were tangible and actionable with a keen gender lens that aligns strategies. The platform's unique look and feel, an emphasis on confidentiality and psychological safety, ensured our team members felt safe to share their stories. So I'd be happy to take any questions that are coming through. I hope that this was helpful for everybody. Feel free to get in touch with me. My email is here, as well as have a look at the website or book a call with me at any time. But yeah, I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I've been making notes throughout, and I'm in so much awe of what you're doing with this. I think it's incredible. I've not heard of anything like this at all, ever, and I just think it's an absolute must. I do know of a whole bunch of companies that are starting to scrabble now to get their plans in place. Most of the people that I know who are looking at plans or planning for this are so far behind with them that it's just conversations, and they don't really have fully formed plans. And I pretty much guarantee that those plans will not be fully formed. They will not be robust enough for what I've just heard you talk about here, which all of that is, it makes complete sense. But unless you do this for a job, unless you're really solidly in this space, and, I guess risk and compliance, people who work in the risk and legal space within their companies may be across this, but the people who are working with the processes and systems in people and culture teams and human resources and diversity and inclusion, are they really across this? That's probably one of my biggest concerns. I've just put a QR code up there for people to take this, whether you're watching now or you're watching this back later. Really important here to, I think, make sure that you have this information to take back to your organizations to continue this discussion and to make sure that actually what you're doing meets the requirements. Now, I noticed, and before we get on to the questions, there's a couple of things here I made notes on, which I just want to run back over with you. So I think one of the biggest messages that comes across here is that you have to understand it. You have to understand the problem space. If you're literally just doing this from a reactive, whereby you are reacting to something that's happening that might affect your organization, and you're literally just doing what's necessary, you're going to be on the back foot and you're probably going to miss stuff. You really need to understand the space. It's a social problem, as you said, not an individual. This isn't about individual people who are causing a problem. It's a social problem. And I think that kind of, I feel like that needs to be shouted for people to really get that I think we tend to just blame a bad apple. And it's not.
No, it's not. It's quite well understood now that, I've worked in gender-based violence and gender equality for probably over 10 years now. It's very well understood, in that industry, that it is a societal-based problem. It's systemic. We can't anymore just rely on understanding these issues as, oh, well, that was a one-off. That happened because, that one-off time, that one person was a problem. We actually have to look at it from that systemic level. We know that there are key drivers behind this behaviour, and organisations. This whole piece of legislation is really about trying to acknowledge that there are these societal or systemic level power imbalances that exist that lead to these issues occurring in workplaces. And it's really asking employers, and not asking but demanding, that employers actually get their head around that and understand that is what's going on, and are actually committed to addressing that on their organisational level. And that's called primary prevention. So that's why I really started with helping everyone understand what the major shift is, because there was obviously legislation in place before this, but it did not look at prevention, and it did not recognise or acknowledge the systemic nature of these type of incidents. The data just speaks for itself. We know that this is a gender-based issue. We know that it's a systemic issue. It's there are just too many patterns and trends that exist for it not to be, and this legislation really speaks to that. And I think, number one, we just have to understand what those are so that we can actually be committed to addressing that from that prevention response. And this is not just about something that's the right thing to do, because it actually makes so much more sense for employers to address this in this way, because prevention doesn't happen in the first place, right? So when you allow it to happen in the first place, you're at huge reputational risk. You're using your resources to manage this tedious complaints-based kind of process, when you could be actually just working towards a time when you can just prevent it happening at all in the first place.
This vicarious liability has got to be the biggest wake-up call for anybody tuning into this, if you haven't considered the fact that if you haven't got the ability to show that you've taken preventative measures, you hold liability. It's, although the individual is responsible for their behavior, an employer has to prove that they've done this stuff. If they can't, then they've got vicarious liability, right?
That's correct. So the Act, as of December 2023, gives these new functions and powers to the Commission to monitor and assess compliance. So this means they can actually conduct inquiries into your compliance regarding positive duty. So that's why I spoke so much about positive duty. You need to show you're taking proactive, positive steps, not just waiting around for something to happen. So they're going to check, so they can actually inquire and conduct inquiries into that and what you've done around positive duty. They can issue compliance notice, specifying the action that you should take or refrain from taking to address it. And then they can also apply to federal courts for an order to direct compliance. And then they can also enter into enforceable undertakings with an employer. So these are very real powers that they do now have to make sure that organisations, employers comply.
So what's the first step an organisation should take to comply with this legislation? If they haven't done it yet, what are the first steps?
Yeah. So those 7 key domains are really important. Firstly, leadership. So there needs to be strong leadership on this issue. There needs to be someone or a team of leaders who are driving this forward and who are actually strategically aligning the organisation with respect at work. And then I would say the number one, well, after doing an assessment of what's already going on and doing that risk assessment of, where you think your policies and strategies are actually at, and understanding, the legislation, understanding what's occurred here, understanding your own workplace context. I would always say the number one step is you need to understand what's happening in your workplace regarding sexual harassment, where it's happening, who it's happening to, all of those things. So if you don't already understand those things, you need to go and measure those things. And again, I really emphasize measurement and reporting are separate. They are separate functions. They exist for separate reasons and they work differently. So measurement is really ensuring that you do understand the prevalence and that you do understand the risks. You do understand specific to your workplace context what's happening and where the biggest issues might be. It might be different to what your reporting data looks like, because you might have, say, complaints-based reports that have come through, and they might just be relating to certain types of incidents that people view as reportable incidents. Whereas when you go and do your measurement, you might find that there's been this whole kind of, under the iceberg, or the iceberg under the water piece, where, there's been some cultural issues come through, some microaggressions that have come through, some types of harassment that have come through that just haven't been deemed as, for whatever reason, reportable by your employees. And if you don't actually measure what's happening in your workplace, I don't believe you will be deemed as compliant, because positive duty is about firstly understanding what's going on so that you can work to prevent it. And you can't be compliant with respect at work if you're not actually understanding first what's happening in order to prevent it. So I'd say really understanding is the first thing, measuring is the first step. Yeah.
So on that, can you tell me a little bit more about what the tool, what Radial does? If it's in someone's organisation, how does it specifically help employers with that particular thing? So how does it, in terms of collecting and analysing the data, what does Radial do?
Mm-hmm. So as we heard today, around 80% of sexual assault does not get reported, and that includes that's a specific to workplace, and I think it's around 90% more broadly in society. So we know that there's a huge data gap. And the reason for that is because there are key barriers that people face when reporting sexual assault, such as internalization and normalization, the perception it's too difficult, or a mistrust of authorities. So what Radial works to do is leverage She's a Crowd's 6+ years of experience of safely and securely collecting anonymous survivor stories in a trauma-informed way by dissolving the key barriers to reporting. So this is a really tricky space, and we know that most employers have no idea how to comply and how to safely and anonymously actually measure this, because it comes with a slew of issues. It's like, oh my gosh, how could you be truly anonymous if we're collecting employee data and then they have an issue, like if they have a technical issue through the survey, then they out themselves. There's like, understanding that this is sensitive and personal information. How do we manage it, and how do we store it, and how do we have to take action on it if we do find out that who the person is? There's just so many issues. So we've sorted through all of those. We know what they all are, and we've been working in this space for so long, and we know how to collect this type of really sensitive data, but in a way that's actually helpful for the people sharing. It's not like an extraction process. It's a cathartic, trauma-informed process. So basically what happens is we work with our customers. We use our best practice existing templates for different industries to design a survey which allows employers to properly collect the data that they need to properly understand this issue across their workplace. Then we manage that process. So they get a cloud-based link. Everyone in the workplace can use it to anonymously share their story, and you can customize it so that you can also include links to support platforms, your EAP, perhaps your complaints, your actual reporting complaints process. All of that can be customized. And then we manage and store the data. We provide you with all of your data, as well as data exploration technology, so you can analyze and see all of the kind of trends and themes. And then we can also do custom insights analysis on the data, so we can make sure you understand what it actually means, what it's actually saying. And then we provide tailored recommendations and next steps as well for you. And then we'll just continue to support you with resources as you try to work in this space to comply with respect at work.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay, so what about the victims? What can an organisation do to support victims that they know about? So if it's been reported, how do they support victims while making sure that there's a fair and unbiased process of investigation?
Yeah. So huge question. The first thing to do is to look at person-centric and trauma-informed approaches to doing this work. So we've obviously gone into some of the individual impacts of these types of incidents. Trauma-informed, like being trauma-informed really just means that you're recognizing the prevalence and impact of trauma, that these things can be traumatizing, understanding how it affects your people, and integrating this knowledge into your policies and processes and practices to avoid re-traumatization and promote healing. So that's why She's a Crowd is trauma-informed, because when we ask people to recount these instances, we're very aware that that could be re-traumatizing, and we make sure it's not. So really being person-centered also means you're putting people at the front of and the center of this process. So you're prioritizing their needs and preferences, experiences throughout either the reporting process or the measurement process or the complaints process, whatever it is. And that requires active listening and empathy and the empowerment of individuals in decision-making processes relating to their care and support. So organisations need to be prioritising safety and empowerment, making sure that their policies and procedures do that, promoting that culture of respect and equality as well. So that inclusive and respectful workplace culture that values diversity and gender equality, providing that comprehensive training to leaders and HR staff to recognise, prevent and respond to sexual harassment and trauma, and establish those clear reporting mechanisms which are super accessible and transparent, offering support and resources confidentially, and continuously evaluating, measuring, and improving upon kind of what you're doing. And that would be, I would say, like the beginnings of a person-centered, trauma-informed model of care in a nutshell.
Yeah, right. So there's a lot of stuff people, organisations can actually do. There's actually quite a lot. They probably should be doing all of them. And I know you talk about transparency. I think it probably is a tricky one, but they absolutely need to understand how important it is to be transparent with employees throughout this whole process. I've got another question, which is more about, this one asks about, you mentioned power imbalances. You mentioned misuse of power as a really sort of key source of or cause, as a root cause. So what about the legislation? Does it address that in terms of the inequality that we see into gender inequality in workplaces?
Yeah, that's right. So going back to that idea that this is a social problem, Respect at Work legislation and the Respect at Work report from 2020 very clearly highlights, first and foremost, and acknowledges that this is about power imbalances. And when working in this space, you need to acknowledge that there are power imbalances within society, and there are power imbalances in the workplace. And I'm sure you can all think of examples of why a victim survivor might feel that they can't speak up or report or do anything because of the position that they have in a workplace in relation to power. So really understanding that as a backdrop, and then recognizing that there are these 4 key drivers of sexual harassment in the workplace, and they all relate to power. The first one is that we need to actually challenge the condoning of sexual harassment. That means actually being open about this, not saying, look, this is uncomfortable to talk about, because we know this is a bit uncomfortable to talk about, but we've got to be transparent. We've got to encourage discussion, inform the workforce, challenge discrimination, challenge attitudes, and review policy. And then the second driver is promoting women's independence and decision-making in the workplace. So that actually means setting those gender equity targets, promoting independence, reviewing your workplace settings, identifying who is actually speaking up in meetings, and informing the workforce that you're doing this and that you prioritize this. The third driver is you should be building a culture that fosters personal identities that are not constrained by rigid gender stereotypes. So this looks like encouraging speaking up, supporting non-traditional roles. Maybe, men can be getting flexible workplace workplace agreements in place, recognizing disrespect, challenging the way things are done around here, and challenging stereotypes. And then the fourth is that we should be supporting men in developing healthy masculinities and positive, supportive male peer relationships. So again, that's about education and challenging gender bias, supporting mentoring, recognizing achievements, promoting positive relationships and support networks. And these are just the kind of 4 drivers that are outlined by Respect at Work. But you can see how, imagine a workplace where you were doing all of those things and how that would feel and look for women, or any survivor, indeed, men as well, who might be experiencing some sort of power dynamic or some sort of harassment. Yeah.
I think the leader side of things is going to be tricky for, like, if you're thinking about senior leadership teams, when you've got male-dominated leadership teams, which is often the case, and even where they're gender balanced or relatively balanced, you've still got some very tricky personalities to deal with sometimes, not in all cases, but I suspect that there'll be people watching this at some point in people and culture teams thinking, well, we've got no hope because of leadership modeling this stuff, because they don't even recognize it or care about it. What advice would you give to those people who are having those concerns about how they could approach getting their leadership team to model this stuff and to be transparent and to get on board with it?
Well, I think that's amazing, and every organization needs those champions within it, and that's often how it starts. And so I think, I really do acknowledge that starting those conversations can be really difficult, and can be really scary. I would urge once again that if you are in a position of leadership within your workplace in any way, that you do, because often it's like that thing of power is blind, you can't see the power you do have. So recognizing that you do have more power than someone who maybe doesn't have that leadership position to do this, and not to leave this to other people, in the workplace who are in lower positions or, whatever, to actually speak up, but actually you doing that work. And I think, finding the champion who will advocate internally for this issue, it's not really the thing is, it's not really a matter anymore of this is a nice to have and hopefully, someone will do something. It's actually the law now. So I'm hoping that we will see a lot of positive action in this space due to this new legislation.
Absolutely. So one call to action, what call to action would you give to people watching this?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, really great that you're obviously already committed to being informed about it because you've watched this. I'm always here to chat. So one call to action could be to book a call with us to discuss this further, because this is very much the space we're in, and I know that it's very complex and confusing. And then one more call to action could be to discuss this with one other colleague who wasn't here today and see if they've heard about it. Ask your manager if they've heard about this, or, what they think of it and what they're planning to do about it, where the company's at with it. That would be awesome.
Okay. So there's your call to action for everybody watching this. We've got a QR code at the top there. So if you haven't scanned it, please do. You'll be able to watch this back. Please share this video across your networks. It's very important that people get on board with this and do it right, lest it comes back and bites you, but at the very least. Thank you, Zoe, for your time today and for all of the work that you're doing in this space. I applaud you, and if there's anything else I can ever do to support you, then I would love to do that. And I hope that everybody enjoyed this session today. We've got 1 minute, so I'm going to close and give you a minute back, everybody. And thank you again, Zoe. You take care.
Thanks so much, Emma.
And thank you to the audience for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.